What do we do if there is a point where the Bible actually tells us it's better not to marry? How do we handle that? My friends, Breakfast with Bradley, come on in, pull up a chair. We're diving into some touchy subjects. We're dealing with marriage. What happens when we're dealing with a marriage that the Bible would say not to enter into, okay? Hey, I wanna take you back to Matthew chapter 19. We're gonna look at this again, and I think there's something very, very important here. We're gonna look at verse 10 and see what it says. The disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry." Let's look at 11 too. He says, "But he said to them, not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given." Okay. So a little bit of background text. We're talking about what God says marriage is all about and what Jesus' expectations are for us to fulfill. That marriage is about unity that can't be split apart unless in the case of sexual immorality, all right? And if you want to know a little bit more about that, we covered that in a previous video. I think it'll really bless you if you want to go back and get some context on what we're jumping into today. But the disciples' kickback is, all right, Jesus, if it's true that the only way that we get out of this marriage thing is because of sexual immorality, maybe it's actually better not to marry. And that brings up an interesting question. Is there ever a time where it is better not to marry? Well, Paul obviously thought so because he taught in the Corinthian church that because of the trouble of the day and because of the incredible persecution, it was better to abstain from marriage because of what was going on. However, he also says if passion is high, if they can't contain themselves, then they need to get married because it's far better to be married than to burn with passion, living a life where you can't have one another. And you can't be betrothed in the way that God wanted you to be betrothed, okay? So we see that there are times where there's not an intent for marriage. And here's the bottom line. When it comes to Christian marriage, which is a covenant between man and woman with God for each other, there are some really hard things that we need to talk about. One, we mostly base our marriages today off of compatibility and pleasure. As long as I'm compatible, right, then I'll have a long-lasting relationship. Well, not really, because what we see is that our characteristics as men change every 20 years and our characteristics of women change every 10 years, meaning that the compatibility you have now in 10 years is probably guaranteed to change. So the person you marry will not be the same person in 10 years or in 20. So that's a problem. And pleasure, well, the reality is that something that's exciting now may not be exciting later. That's why we buy new cars. That's why we get new houses. It's why we upgrade products. It's why we can't always have the same phone because there's always something new coming out. And the reality is if you're basing your relationship on pleasure, there will always be someone new that you can chase after. But this is not the concept of biblical marriage. Biblical marriage is a covenant with God to love someone that he's brought alongside of you. This is not necessarily based on compatibility, and it's certainly not based on pleasure. It's based on a promise to God for one another. So when the disciples ask Jesus, they say, well, if this is the case, if marriage is so severe before the Lord, maybe it's a better idea not to get married at all, right? And so Jesus says, all right, not everybody can receive this. And I think that it's important to note that why this is being said is because a lot of people get into marriage for the wrong reason. They get into marriage because they have an ego about themselves or about their needs. They have an idea of what they think they're going to get from marriage that marriage should never provide. And the opportunity to scapegoat being lonely supersedes actually having a relationship with God. And because of that, marriage and having a spouse can easily turn into an idol, and it can easily turn into a drug. Drug for pleasure, idol for worship, right? We worship our spouse because we think they're the best thing in the world and that we can't survive without them. Or even worse is we use them as a drug so that we're just simply satisfied by what they can give to us, which only gets worse and worse and worse. Like even in drug use, you have to get more and more of the same drug to have the same kind of experience or effect. So coming back to this, there are times where we have the wrong view of marriage, and that is that marriage is just something that will benefit me, something that will make me happy, something that will do good for me. My friends, none of that is what marriage is about. Marriage is about God bringing two people together and those two people responding to what God is doing by taking covenant to love each other and to become more like God in their interaction with each other so that they have a fruitful, wonderful experience. And that is what we see happen in the beginning. And again, if you want to know a little bit more about that, go check out that previous video. So understand there are times where we should abstain from marriage. If we're not doing in light of what God wants, then yeah, it's a bad idea. Don't go down that road, all right? But if it's something that God is doing, bringing you together, and you can submit to his will, then it's a good thing, and it's something that we should hold very highly and very dearly to us. Hey, we're gonna talk about more later this week, so see you then. My friends, Breakfast with Bradley is making a powerful difference, and you are part of that. If you would consider joining with us financially to reach more people, go to our Patreon account and sign up, and my friends, we'll make a powerful difference in all those who want to hear. Thanks for being part of us. God bless you.